Most of the recent warming could be natural by Jennifer Marohasy from August 2017 this year from the Jennifer Marohasy website. After deconstructing 2,000-year-old proxy temperature series back to their most basic components and then rebuilding them using the latest big data techniques, John Abbot and I show what global temperatures might have done in the absence of an industrial revolution. The results from this novel technique, just published in GeoResJ, accord with climate sensitivity estimates from experimental spectroscopy, but are at odds with output from general circulation models. According to mainstream climate science, most of the recent global warming is our fault, caused by human emissions of carbon dioxide. The rationale for this is speculative theory about absorption and the emission of infrared radiation by carbon dioxide that dates back to 1896. It's not disputed that carbon dioxide absorbs infrared radiation. What is uncertain is the sensitivity of the climate to increasing atmospheric concentrations. This sensitivity may have been grossly overestimated by savant Arrhenius more than 120 years ago, with those estimations persisting in the computer simulation models that underpin modern climate science. We just don't know, in part because the key experiments have never been undertaken. What I do have are whiz-bang gaming computers that can run artificial neural networks, ANN, which are a form of machine learning, think big data, and artificial intelligence. My colleague, Dr. John Abbot, has been using this technology for over a decade to forecast the likely direction of a particular stock on the share market for tomorrow. Since 2011, I've been working with him to use this same technology for rainfall forecasting for the next month and season. And we now have a bunch of papers in the international climate science journals on the application of this technique, showing it's more skillful than the Australian Bureau of Meteorology's general circulation models for forecasting monthly rainfall. During this past year, we've extended this work to build models to forecast what temperatures would have been in the absence of human emission of carbon dioxide for the last 100 years. We figure that if we could apply the latest data mining techniques to mimic natural cycles of warming and cooling, specifically to forecast 20th century temperatures in the absence of an industrial revolution, then the difference between the temperature profile forecast by the models and the actual temperatures would give an estimation of the human contribution from industrialization. Firstly, we deconstruct a few of the longer temperature records, proxy records that had already been published in the mainstream climate science literature. These records are based on things like tree rings and coral cores, which can provide an indirect measure of past temperatures. Most of these records show cycles of warming and cooling that fluctuated within a period band of approximately 2 degrees centigrade. For example, there were multiple lines of evidence indicating that it was about a degree warmer across Western Europe during a period known as the medieval warm period, the MWP. Indeed, there are coddles of published technical papers based on proxy records that provide a relatively warm temperature profile for this period, corresponding with the building of cathedrals across England and therefore the Little Ice Age, when it was too cold for the inhabitation of Greenland. I date the MWP from 986 AD, when the Vikings settled in southern Greenland, until 1234, when a particularly harsh winter took out the last of the olive trees growing in Germany. I date the end of the Little Ice Age as in 1826, when Upernavik in northwest Greenland was again inhabitable after a period of 592 years. The modern inhabitation of Upernavik also corresponds with the beginning of the Industrial Age. For example, it was on the 15th of September 1830 that the first coal-fired train arrived in Liverpool from Manchester, which some claim as the beginning of the modern era of fast, long-distance fossil-fueled fired transport for the masses. So, the end of the Little Ice Age corresponds with the beginning of industrialization. But did industrialization cause the global warming? In our just published paper on GeoResJ, we make the assumption that an artificial neural network, ANN, trained on proxy temperature data up until 1830 would be able to forecast the combined effect of natural climate cycles throughout the 20th century. We deconstructed 6 proxy series from different regions, with the Northern Hemisphere composite discussed here. This temperature series begins in 50 AD and ends in the year 2000 and is derived from studies of the pollen, lake sediments, stalagmites, and boreholes. Typical of most such proxy temperature series, when charted, this series zigzags up and down within a band of perhaps 0.4 degrees centigrade on a short time scale of perhaps 60 years. Over the longer, nearly 2,000 year period of the record, it shows a rising trend which peaks in 1200 AD before trending down to 1650 AD, and then rising to about 1980, and then dipping to the year 2000, as shown in this figure on the graph that I shared. Proxy temperatures recorded in blue and the projection in orange based on the input from spectral analysis for this northern hemisphere multi-proxy. The ANN was trained for the period of 50 to 1830. Test period was from 1830 to 2000. The decline at the end of the record is typical in many such proxy temperature reconstructions and is known as within the technical literature as the divergence problem. To be clear, while the temperature and satellite-based temperature records generally show a temperature increase through the 20th century, the proxy record, which is used to describe the temperature changed over the last 2,000 years for a period that predates thermometers and satellites, generally dips from 1980, at least for northern hemispheric locations as shown in figure 12 above. It is particularly the case with tree ring records. Rather than address this issue, key climate scientists have been known to graft instrumental temperature series onto the proxy record from 1980 to literally hide the decline. Using the proxy record from the northern hemisphere composite, decomposing this through signal analysis and then using the resulting component sine waves as a input to ANN, we generated a forecast for the period from 1830 to 2000. Below, in our new paper from GeoResJ, shows the extent of the match between the proxy temperature and the record blue line in our ANN forecast, the orange dashed line, from 1880 to the year 2000. Both the proxy record and our ANN forecast, trained on data that predates the Industrial Revolution, show a general increase in temperatures to 1980 and then a decline. Proxy temperature record blue and ANN projection orange for a component of the last test period, 1880 to 2000. The average divergence between proxy temperature record from this northern hemisphere composite and the ANN projection for this period, 1880 to 2000, is just 0.09 degrees Celsius. This suggests that even if there had been no industrial revolution and burning of fossil fuels, there would have been still some warming through the 20th century to at least 1980. Considering the results from all 6 geographic regions, as reported in our new paper, output from the ANN models suggests that warming from natural climate cycles over the 20th century would be an order of 0.6 to 1 degree centigrade, depending on the geographic location. The difference between the output from the ANN models and the proxy records is that at most 0.2 degrees centigrade. This was the situation for the studies from Switzerland and New Zealand. So we suggest that at most the contribution of industrialization to warming over the 20th century would be in the order of 0.2 degrees centigrade. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, estimates warming of approximately 1 degree centigrade, but attributes this all to industrialization. The IPCC comes up with a very different assessment because they essentially remodel the proxy temperature series before comparing them with output from general circulation models. For example, the last IPCC assessment report concluded that in the northern hemisphere from 1983 to 2012 was likely the warmest 30-year period of the last 1,400 years. If we go back 1,400 years, we have a period in Europe immediately following the fall of the Roman Empire and predating the MWP. So clearly the IPCC denies that the MWP was as warm as current temperatures. This is the official consensus science, that temperatures were flat for 1,300 years and then suddenly kick up from sometime after 1830 and suddenly after 1880 with no decline at 1980. To be clear, while mainstream climate science is replete with published proxy temperature studies showing that temperatures have cycled up and down over the last 2,000 years, spiking during the medieval warm period, and then again recently to about 1980, as shown in Figure 12, the IPCC reconstructions, which underpin the Paris Accord, deny such cycles. Through this denial, leaders from within this much revered community can claim that there is something unusual about current temperatures, that we have catastrophic global warming from industrialization. In our new paper, GeoResJ, we not only use the latest techniques and big data to show that there would very likely have been significant warming to at least 1980 in the absence of industrialization, we also calculate an equilibrium climate sensitivity, ECS, of 0.6 degrees centigrade. This is the temperature increase expected from a doubling of carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. This is an order of magnitude less than estimates from the general circulation models, but in accordance from the values generated from the experimental spectroscopic studies and other approaches reported in the scientific literature. The science is far from settled. In reality, some of the data is problematic. The underlying physical mechanisms are complex and poorly understood. The literature voluminous, and the new alternative techniques, such as our method using ANNs, can give very different answers to those derived from general circulation models and the remodeled proxy temperature series. Folks, I'm going to include a few references below that you can read and click on those. Thank you for coming to the Plain Mundane Show. I'm Alex Aquarius.